So today we're talking about how diabetes impacts hair health. Okay. And so that's something that's not really talked about a whole lot, but it does affect hair health. And then the thing that we're going to talk about is just what is needed for the hair. So what are some essential nutrients that are needed for the hair? All right. And so, like I said, we're going to talk about some nutrients that are needed for the hair first. So one of the important nutrients that's needed for the hair is going to be protein. Protein is essentially the building block for all the cells in our body, starting at the cellular level, then to the tissues, to the organs, and everything else. And that includes hair. So that's one of the things that's needed. If protein helps out with the tissues and things, what else does it do? So we get protein from animal sources like meat, fish, eggs, and things like that. And we also can get some protein from legumes. But in addition to just being the building block for our organs and tissues, protein also provides some vitamins and minerals. So vitamin B12 is an important one that we get from protein too. Iron, zinc, and other B vitamins. And another B vitamin that you find commonly in hair supplements and hair vitamins is going to be biotin. That is B7. That's part of keratin, and that's important for hair growth. So we've got protein that is needed. And actually, what happens when we're deficient on protein is that the body is going to prioritize the protein to go to the important organs. So important organs are the things that keep us alive, the brain, the heart, the kidneys, and things like that. So if we're low on protein, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, then we can go into starvation mode, at least for the body, and it's going to funnel the protein to the organs that need it. And we don't need hair to live, okay? It's something that is pretty and can keep us warm and whatnot, but we don't need hair to live. And so if we are needing protein and we're deficient, it's going to go everywhere else except for the hair. And that can lead to problems with hair growth and problems with hair loss. So protein is an essential nutrient that's needed. Another essential nutrient that's needed for the hair is going to be fat. And we ran into trouble like 20 years ago or so. There was this fad where the low-fat diet was a big deal, and that was supposed to be the best diet. But it turns out that was not the best diet as we know today, because the cells in our body are actually made up of fat. Okay, that's one of the things that helps the cell stay around. And we're made up of lots and lots and lots of cells, hundreds of thousands of cells. That's what make up our body. So we do need fat. And not all fats are created equal. We need healthy fats. But what do fats do for the hair? Fats help to hydrate the hair, keep the hair supple, moving well, soft, shiny, and not breaking. An essential fatty acid that we need is omega-3. Omega-3 does other things too, like it helps to decrease inflammation, which inflammation around the hair follicles is bad, and that can lead to hair loss. Having omega-3 and healthy fats in the diet is important. And so what are some sources of healthy fats? We've got fatty fish, things like salmon and tuna and whatnot, chia seeds, those are plant sources, eggs, and flax seeds, just to mention a few. So fats are needed for the hair to hydrate the hair. And incidentally, like I said, omega-3 helps to decrease inflammation, and chronic diseases are associated with inflammation, and diabetes is one of those chronic diseases that's associated with inflammation in the blood vessels. And we have tiny little blood vessels going to our hair follicles, which we're going to talk about here shortly. So something else that we need is vitamin E. And vitamin E we can get from food. There's vitamin E supplements too, but fruits like vegetables, dark green leafy vegetables, nuts, and seeds have vitamin E. And what does vitamin E do? It helps in the formation of the tiny blood vessels that go to our hair follicles. And these tiny blood vessels carry nutrients and oxygen to the hair follicles. Where if the hair follicles that help with hair growth, so they'll think of those as the roots of the hair, if they don't get the nutrients and oxygen that they need, then that can lead to hair loss. So vitamin E is important. Incidentally, vitamin E and vitamin D, which we're going to talk about next, are fat soluble vitamins. So if you're on a low fat diet and you don't have enough fat in your diet, that leads to problems with actually absorbing the fat soluble vitamins, which can lead to problems with hair loss too. So vitamin D, like I said, is associated with hair loss if we're deficient, and you can get that from the sun. However, we told everybody to stay out of the sun and wear sunscreen. So these days, a lot of people are deficient, even in sunny places like here in Arizona. I'm putting people on vitamin D all the time for low vitamin D. And actually, if you don't wear sunscreen, then you get skin cancer. So got to do it. There's other foods that are fortified with vitamin D, like milk, and you can get it from egg yolk. You can get it from fatty fish too. And so those are some food sources of vitamin D, which is needed. So what causes hair loss? So we talked about nutrients, so nutrient deficiencies. So there are some diets out there that are really calorie restricted. Like if you're on a low fat diet, then you're going to be deficient in omega-3s like we talked about. And that can lead to hair loss because now the hair isn't getting the hydration that it needs. It gets brittle and then it breaks off. And then you're also having problems with absorbing the fat soluble vitamins, for example. And then there's also these kind of starvation diets where people just are not eating enough. So if you're not eating enough, then you're not getting enough of the nutrients that you need, the protein, the fat, and the vitamins that we talked about. So that can also lead to hair loss, which isn't good. And actually, being on a calorie restricted diet can put your body into starvation mode. And that starvation in and of itself is a stressor on the body, and stress in itself is another thing that can lead to hair loss. And so you've got two different things happening. You're calorie restricted and the body is under stress too. Stress leads to an increase in a hormone called cortisol, which is a stress-related hormone. So that's something else that can happen. And just by eating lots of junk food, so highly processed foods, people who are eating lots of that stuff and not getting enough fruits and vegetables and natural meats that aren't processed and whatnot, those highly processed foods tend to be deficient in nutrients because all the nutrients have kind of been processed out. That's another thing that can lead to problems with hair loss if there's nutrient deficiencies related to that. Now, there's other things that can cause hair loss that we're just going to touch on quickly, but we're not going to go into detail, like autoimmune disorders, like thyroid problems. For example, Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, that can cause hair loss. Things like lupus, which is another autoimmune disorder, can cause hair loss. Medications can also cause hair loss. And so somebody can be in several different categories for hair loss. So it's like, look at this on an individual basis. So chemotherapy medications, immunosuppressants, things like steroids, those can also cause a side effect of hair loss too. And like I talked about, stress can cause hair loss. Having an infection, for example, COVID-19, which can be a huge stressor on the body, can lead to hair loss. And actually, after like a stressful episode, the hair loss might not happen for a couple of months later, actually, after the stressful event. And then people forget about the stressful event and don't connect those two things to the hair loss. Just being ill can cause hair loss. Pregnancy can cause hair loss too, which leads to my next point, which is hormonal imbalances, which happen in a lot of women. Hormonal imbalances can lead to hair loss, pregnancy, going through menopause. And incidentally, women also have androgens. So these are hormones that are typically talked about in males, which testosterone is one of them, and dihydrotestosterone, which I'm going to refer to as DHT. So those are some hormones that are involved with hair loss too. So what happens, especially in women, but this can happen in men too, as we get older, the levels of DHT increase as we get older, and higher levels of DHT are associated with hair loss and weakening around the hair follicles. And so that's something that actually happens, like can find like women as we get older, there's like hair loss that starts to happen. And that's because of the hormonal imbalance. Let's get to where diabetes fits into this. So diabetes is a disease associated with insulin resistance. So diabetes is associated with insulin resistance, as you know, and there's higher levels of insulin circulating around because the insulin isn't working very well. And so with diabetes or insulin resistance, so even pre-diabetes that's associated with insulin resistance, you've got higher blood sugars, and higher blood sugars can lead to increased testosterone. Remember, we talked about hormone imbalances being associated with hair loss. Well, insulin is another hormone, okay? So diabetes is a hormone imbalance associated with insulin. So what happens when you have higher levels of testosterone circulating around due to the higher blood sugars, that leads to increased risk for the testosterone converting to DHT, which is associated with hair loss. Advanced insulin resistance is actually diabetes, okay? And so with diabetes, if it's uncontrolled, high circulating blood sugars for long periods of time, in the long run, that can lead to problems with circulation because of inflammation in the blood vessels. And remember those tiny blood vessels that go to the hair follicles, now they're not getting enough blood because of problems with circulation. And so nutrients and oxygen that need to go to the hair aren't getting there. And that can lead to hair loss. That is an overview of how diabetes and insulin resistance can impact hair health and things to do about it. So just to recap, things that can cause hair loss, nutrient deficiencies. We went over protein, healthy fats, vitamin D, vitamin E, the B vitamins, and actually anemia, which we need for oxygen to the red blood cells. Anemia is also associated with hair loss.